Welcome to Get the Picture podcast. I'm your host, Brad Sigal. While I've been taking pictures on and off going back to the 1980s, when I picked up my camera in a serious way again about 10 years ago, it was because I started doing longer distance bike rides all around the Twin Cities and found myself just in amazing locations and just seeing stunningly beautiful landscapes in the 50-ish mile radius of the Twin Cities. And I tried to capture what I was seeing with a phone, and as you can guess, I wasn't getting great images. But, then I started thinking, well, maybe I should bring a camera with me. So that's really what got me back into photography, was trying to take pictures of landscapes. And since then, I've moved on to mostly do other types of photography. But because landscapes are what brought me back into photography, I'm really excited that today's guest was willing to come talk about landscape photography. I followed his work for the last 5 years or so, and I really encourage you to check out his website and social media after you listen to this interview because, wow, he really can do exactly what I was trying unsuccessfully to do when I was out on my bike, which is to truly capture the magnitude of the beauty on our planet. And he's done that all over Minnesota and many places around the country. And so I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, John Steitz.
Thanks, Brad. It's good to be here. And that was a very kind introduction. I appreciate it.
I try to butter up my guests, what can we say? So let's just start with, on your website, it says you're a landscape photographer. There's also a section of wildlife. Let's start off with who you are, a little bit about your background and what you photograph.
Sure. So my name's John Steitz. I live in the wonderful neighborhood of South Minneapolis. I was born in Chicago and then raised out in Salt Lake City, Utah. So setting aside the culture shock of that, it afforded me access to some of the most spectacular wilderness areas and landscapes in the country. And I was also fortunate enough to be raised by a strong conviction for the preservation of wilderness and the exploration thereof. So I spent a lot of time in the Utah deserts and mountains doing, some volunteer work for some wilderness preservation council out there, as well as the Nature Conservancy and so on. So I think that was probably the genesis of my passion for the outdoors, not only for my own selfish recreational endeavors, but also for conservation. And I have since been really interested in where sort of activism and art intersect. I know you are also, Brad. You spend a lot of time out on the front lines, and I admire your work very much. That you send back. I'm kind of I'm not as well versed in the portraiture kind of street photography side of things, so I've done a little bit. But I do try to use my landscape work as a vehicle for activism in a way. I always, I don't just share stuff on Instagram and say, look how pretty this is. I often try to tag in some sort of, this place is under threat for this particular mine or, whatever it might be. Climate change is going to render this place unrecognizable in a couple decades. So it's kind of me showing the public they stand to lose and sort of banging them on the head like, you need to care about this, you need to care about this. So yeah, born in Chicago, raised in Utah, and then moved here to Minneapolis high school years and sort of fell in love with the nature out here as well.
Yeah, so you do, it seems like, a lot of camping too, right? So, and hiking. Is that how you decided to start doing photography of some of the amazing landscapes? Were you just out camping anyways and said like, hey, I should bring my camera?
Yeah, kinda. Let's see. I first got my first interchangeable lens camera. It's 2006 ish. And I would go backpacking without it, which is kind of nice not to be weighed down. But then I just started bringing it along, and it became a new dimension for me of the sport, and kind of the same thing with activism as well, I suppose. Shortly after I got my first camera, I was living in downtown St. Paul, and the RNC came to town in 2008. And so that was my first foray, I think, into, photojournalism and trying to document moments. And probably started to develop whatever style I have for that sort of thing that then carried into different protest movements in the Twin Cities over the past 10 years or so, 15 years. And then I did a series during the uprising in 2020 that you may remember. It was a bunch of black and white portraits of people I ran into on the street. So yeah, I think these were things I was doing already, and then I decided to incorporate the camera into it, if that makes any sense. So the love of the outdoors and the backpacking and the fishing and climbing mountains and all that came before the camera. So these are subject matter that I'm passionate about, irrespective of the photography.
Yeah, one thing that just came to mind too is that because it popped up in my Facebook memories from when I was in New York City, I don't know how many years ago, and saw an exhibition of Sebastião Salgado's work, of him doing these incredible landscapes. And I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but yeah, that's something that, is it Genesis maybe? Anyway, just wondering if you have people who influence your style in terms of how you do landscape photography specifically.
Oh gosh. Well, shout out Ansel Adams. He's sort of my hero in all ways. I think he's Papa landscape photographer for a lot of us, kind of paved the way. But also, he's a hero of mine, not only for his artistic genius, but for the way he melded activism and art. And he was a fierce proponent of the National Park Service and, the designation of wilderness areas. And in fact, we have him to thank for literally the creation of Kings Canyon National Park in the Sierra, which I backpacked through. In 2016, I thru-hiked the John Muir Trail. It was about 3 weeks on trail.
Wow.
And I was kind of following in his footsteps because he did the same thing. And he published a book of photographs from there that ended up on the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, if I'm remembering right, during the FDR administration. And FDR loved the book so much that he stole it. And then it ended up becoming Kings Canyon National Park, thanks in part to the work that Ansel Adams did to bring that scenery to the American public and generate support for it. So artists have the capacity to influence public opinion and to create change. And Ansel Adams, to me, was always a great example of that. And that's why he's my OG hero.
Amazing. Yeah. I wanted to mention too, when you were talking about being from Utah and doing some photography out there, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went on a trip to Arizona and Utah, and we hit as many of the national parks as we could in a short trip, and not nearly as much time in each one as we would have liked. But I did have my camera, and those are, you just get overwhelmed day to day with so many photos, and I still haven't finished editing all of those, Canyonlands, and forget all the ones that we made it to. But it's really a stunningly beautiful area of the country. I agree, and again, encourage people to check out your photos from there.
They won't find any from Canyonlands or Arches, which I visited that area, the Moab area, the kind of southeast, a lot as a kid, but I haven't been back since.
Okay,
but there's some others from Utah in there.
Amazing. Yeah, and we also hit like the northern rim of the Grand Canyon, which was pretty amazing.
Nice. Yeah, and yeah, shout out to the Rangers on the North Rim for all they went through. Most of the North Rim burned down last year in fire. So
wow, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yep.
So you talked a little bit about how your journey started with doing wildlife and landscape and wildlife photography, and just looking at your images, and it's interesting that you brought up Ansel Adams, because I could say some of the same things about his, although his work is all black and white and yours isn't. Some of it is color, some's black and white, but the images that you make they have so much incredible depth and texture and light, and often sometimes symmetry, like if there's a body of water with a reflection, things like that. I know creating those compositions doesn't come the first time you take out your camera and press the shutter. So how long has it taken you to develop your skills to be able to do the landscape photography that you do?
Gosh, I don't know. I think some of it is sort of innate eye for composition, but a quick jaunt back down memory lane in my photo library would suggest that otherwise. Every photographer is like this. If you go back in time and look at your old work, you're just like, what was I thinking? Whether it's the post processing or whatever. And I think that's especially true in landscape work because you can really overdo it. As opposed to portraiture work, if someone's face is like beet red, or if you crank a color slider on something, like you're not fooling anyone. But in landscape photography, I think sometimes there's a little bit more artistic discretion as far as how you want the image to look than in some other sorts of photography. With that being said, over time, I think I've dialed it back a little bit and sort of went to a guiding philosophy of like staying true to the scene and letting nature do the talking, if you will. Some of the techniques have become more complex, and I might spend an hour or two on one image, applying filters and just all the post-processing stuff, but in the end I'm trying to land at something that looks as natural as possible, that looks like the scene looked like for me. And anyone going back, anyone who listens to this and looks at some of my work, if they're on Instagram, you can go back in time and you'll probably see exactly what I'm talking about. You'll go back far enough, 5-6 years ago, and you're like, dude was a little aggressive. So
I think it's a common journey, right? Where you discover the clarity slider and you're like, ooh, let's crank that all the way up. Or,
Yeah, exactly. And there are other things like you try to think about how the human eye works relative to a camera. And there are some things with depth and contrast. You can manipulate a photograph to make it feel more like the human experience of being in a place rather than, what a camera sees. A lot of people may experience this in real time tonight if they go out to watch the aurora. Right, they're going to look at the aurora and it's going to look like a milky sort of white thing. And then they're going to take their phone out and they're going to point their phone at it and it's going to be so colorful. That's because your eye and a camera don't work the same way. You're largely colorblind at night, and a camera has no such limitation. So those colors end up being much more vibrant than they are to your eye. The human eye works differently than the camera, and having some sort of understanding of how both work, you can try to create images that are more natural and place the viewer in a scene rather than having them look at something that's obviously not of this world.
Right. And I do want to get into more depth on editing techniques and photographic techniques in a little bit. So instead of responding right now, though, I'm going to hit pause on that and kind of go back maybe to a little bit bigger picture questions, if that's okay. Just wondering kind of what you find most rewarding about photographing nature and wildlife, and what keeps you motivated to keep shooting.
Well, it keeps me motivated to keep shooting. I don't know. I feel like we're chasing the dragon. We're chasing that one perfect sunrise, or I'm chasing that one moment where a wolf pops out of the woods to, catch a moose or something. There's always a photograph out there that's going to be better than my best photograph. And it's almost like Pokemon Go, got to catch them all sort of thing. Like I try to go to all these, wilderness areas and national parks in the U.S. And if anything, it's motivation to go outside. It's motivation to strap a backpack on and climb a mountain. It gives me an excuse to live as fully as I can and experience everything I can experience, because it's a big old planet. As John Muir said, something to the effect of it's a big beautiful world, and I want to have a good look at it before it gets dark.
I love that.
And if I don't have, we can all get lazy. And when I'm out on my backpacking trips or on these kind of photographic expeditions, I'm up hours before dawn. I might stay up at night to shoot astro. I might go climb a mountain I might not have otherwise climbed to get a certain view. Just kind of forces me to torture myself to see things, to bear witness, to things.
That's something I really vibe with, because definitely wanting to get photographs has caused me to have a lot of experiences I would have never otherwise had, whether it's going out, like while out in one of these national parks, like you said, dragging my tired butt out of, sleep to get the sunrise, or being out in the middle of the night at a national park to try and get the Milky Way, and with the mountains in the foreground. Anyway, yeah, you have just a lot more incredible experiences in life, and that's a good thing in and of itself.
Yeah,
So
it can be the camera itself can be a catalyst for your own enrichment and
exactly,
enjoyment.
yeah. So how do you decide where to shoot? Like, do you obviously on places where you go that are far away, you have to do some advanced planning, but you also have done a lot right here in Minnesota. How do you decide where you're going to shoot? Do you plan a lot in advance? And just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. How do I decide where to shoot? Gosh. Part of it is seasonal, or dependent on what time of year it is. Like I in August every year we go up to the mountains and spend time above tree line in environments and habitats that are otherwise pretty much off limits for 9 months out of the year, 8 months out of the year. So part of it is that. Another part of it is, I suppose, going to new places. So I might not go to the same place over and over, although there are places we go pretty religiously, like Death Valley National Park in California is just a landscape photographer mecca. We go there usually for a week in New Year's time. So somewhere in the desert Southwest, usually in the winter, again, because I'm not going to go backpacking through that place in July, right? But I
that
can
was
do
the
it
mistake we made. We made that mistake, but yeah.
You went to Death Valley in July?
Not Death Valley, no, but the trip I mentioned before to Arizona and Utah was in the middle of the summer. Yeah, we weren't backpacking. Right. We were in a car and whatever, but it was rough. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the winter, I'll probably go vibe out in some deserts. I'll probably go up north to photograph the ice on the lake, and the owls that come out to the Northland. A lot of the boreal critters that sort of make their way down into the Arrowhead during that time of year. And then in the summer, too hot for the deserts, I'll probably go up north a couple times. Usually I have to go up north at least once to backpack and make sure my dog is still sprightly enough to head to the mountains in a couple months. Yeah, so a lot of it's to do with seasons. And do I plan ahead? Very much so. The backpacking routes, I'm going to put myself as close as I can to good scenes to photograph sunrise and sunset, within reason. And I'll go on Google Earth and figure out everything. We just got back from the Canadian Rockies. We were up there for about 11 days on a honeymoon. And
congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And this would be a good example of the amount of planning that goes into things. So on my GPS app here, like this is the general region of where we were, and you can see all the hiking trails, and there's waypoints with cross the river, go to this side, point your camera this way, it looks good at this time of day, yada yada. So I will spend incredible amounts of time researching the area, especially in a place that I know I'm not coming back to, or I'm investing a lot of time and energy in visiting this place. I'll just research it to death and drop waypoints everywhere and download all the offline topography and apps I might need to help myself with along the way. It was kind of weird to be talking about being out in the wilderness and making sure your apps work. But yeah, so an incredible amount of planning, looking at what time of day, the seasons, different angles. And I even adventure buddy of mine has a VR headset, and we'll go onto Google Earth in the VR and we'll kind of cruise around and like look at different, and we're like, well, what if we go hike up on top of this little ridge? What does it look like over there? Ansel
Wow.
didn't have that.
Yeah, yeah.
Ansel definitely did not have that. I made that into an incredibly long answer. The short answer is yes, so an incredible amount of preparation, and the places that I go are carefully considered.
So that's a good note for beginners or people interested in trying landscape photography. I mean, you certainly can just go to a national park and start wandering around and hope you find a good scene, and you'll find some good scenes. But if
Mm-hmm.
you want to get all of the aspects coming together for a really incredible photo, the advanced planning helps immensely because you can find out where this exactly where the sun is going to be as it's coming up and plan where you need to be to get the best view of that. You can find out, and similarly at sunset, you can find out where the Milky Way is going to be if you want to try and get an image with the Milky Way. All those things take planning, and it, it it's not something where you just show up and press the shutter.
Yeah, and in the type of landscape photography that I do is typically wilderness based. I'm backpacking, so there are layers of permitting and where's water and very practical concerns that you kind of have to intertwine in with the photography part. Yeah, if that makes sense.
So can you talk a little bit about the importance of light in landscape photography and how beginners maybe should think about it? Light obviously is crucial to all photography, but if you want to get a picture of a landscape, let's say the Grand Canyon or wherever, you'll get a very different picture of the same scene at blue hour, golden hour, midday, where depending on where, even from minute to minute during sunrise and sunset, you'll get a very different picture depending on where the light is and what direction it's shining and how much of an angle it's coming at. And now I'm kind of answering the question, so I'll just stop talking. And yeah, can you just talk about the importance of light? It's really notable in your photos, your awareness of where the light is and how it's hitting your subject.
Yeah, thanks. Light's kind of everything. If I had one, piece of advice, it'd be follow the light. I'm as guilty as anyone of having an idea in my head and like this is what I want to shoot, and sometimes the light isn't cooperating. Sometimes you have to pivot and do something else. And trying to be open minded about what to shoot in the times of day or the conditions that aren't really panning out the way you might have hoped. Is it an overcast day and there's no light going on? Okay, that's a great time to shoot waterfalls. Are there any waterfalls around that I can find? I can get away with longer shutter speeds if it's really dark out. Are there any intimate scenes? Maybe I need to focus on some tree portraitures or some leaves on the ground or whatever it might be. Maybe the grand landscape I had in mind, the conditions aren't really cooperating for that. Let's let nature dictate what's happening. And a good instinct also is if something catches your eye, take a picture of it. It could be a stump, on the ground or whatever it is. There's a reason something catches your eye in the first place. So don't get too bogged down in, I don't have the perfect light right now, so I might as well just sit in a hotel room or something. And that
Right.
kind of defeats the purpose, as I was saying before, is I use the camera also as a catalyst to just go out and enjoy nature. And if you're so hung up on the perfect conditions and the perfect light, you miss the forest for the trees, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So yeah, just let nature dictate, I guess. Let the light dictate. Whatever's going on, let that dictate. Because if you just go up to some overlook that someone's taking, there's millions of pictures of that overlook and it's a clear bluebird day, there's nothing interesting happening, by all means take the photograph, but what are you trying to say? What are you trying to communicate with that photograph if it looks the same as something that a million other people have done? You're just adding to the noise at that point, which is something I'm guilty of as well. But just being open-minded, being flexible, being willing to pivot, looking at smaller, more intricate scenes when the light's not right for the big landscape stuff is a good way to be.
Yeah, that's some great advice. So what are some things you'd say matter most for someone who's just starting in landscape or wildlife photography? And what are maybe some common mistakes you see beginners make? Maybe what you were just talking about would be one, to just try and
Mhm.
force the shot when the light's not there. And
Yeah, I'd say get that dial off of auto and take a million blurry photographs, and learn from your mistakes first. Um, Another piece of advice that I wish someone had given me was go ahead and watch some tutorial videos. Find some photographers' work. Find photographers who have work that resonate with you, and see if they have any tutorial videos, learn their techniques, and then incorporate them into your own. Go watch some other tutorials, learn those techniques, incorporate them into your own. Because, I mean, photography is an art like any other art. Musicians borrow from other musicians. They have inspirations. They learn from them. They learn their songs. And then somewhere in that amalgamation comes a new style, right? So that would be the best piece of advice I can get is learn from professionals, watch tutorial videos, stuff like that. I don't think I did enough of that, and I probably spent a few years playing catch up when I could have just watched some tutorial videos, you know. But at the same time, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take crappy pictures. I have a hard drive full of crappy pictures. Storage space is not expensive, you know. Another piece of advice is just buy the 30 terabyte hard drive or whatever you can, you know, because God, I had to transfer about 14 terabytes after a hard drive failed, and it took like a week.
Wow.
Anyway, that's unrelated.
It's good advice, though. Appreciate you sharing it. So I want to hear some stories, like what we've been talking more in general and kind of a little abstractly, but what are some of the most amazing moments you've experienced while photographing landscapes or wildlife? And what are some of your favorite places to shoot, maybe?
Sure. I'll go with the first question. Some amazing moments. Earlier, I was going to say this year, it's 2026. Last year, in August, I was photographing a big grizzly boar, maybe 100 yards up a hill, feeding on a bison carcass. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden there's a rustling behind me, and there's a grizzly mom and cub, maybe 25 feet away. So me and a few other photographers kind of back up slowly, like a slow retreat, and the mom and cub try to get across the road. But then by that point, some cars had stopped and people are getting out of their cars and they're making a ruckus. So mama stands up, huffs, and then comes right at us. And I dove over an embankment. And then I look up and there's mom like 10 feet away, not even from me. She popped out at the same exact spot with her cub. So then I banged on some guy's truck door and I was like, let us in. And he let me in. And then I pointed the lens out of the window, and then mom came right up on top and just dagger looked right at me. And I had to zoom. It's weird to have to zoom out to get a grizzly bear in frame. But that's what happened. So that was
Wow.
exciting. It's closer than you'd want to come. But yeah, moments like that are incredible. Just a week ago, I guess, we were up at this lake called Lake Abraham in Alberta, Canada. Like I said, we're up in the Canadian Rockies. And I was at this lake that's known for having these methane bubbles that get caught in the ice and they freeze and they make these little stacks, and it's just gorgeous. And the lake is windy enough because it's like a eastward facing canyon to the plains that blows all the snow off the lake. So you always have a view of it. And we woke up and I saw the sky starting to peak. So we went out there to shoot, but it was like 50, 60 mile an hour winds on this sheet of ice. And it was dark. So I could it would literally blow me across the lake. So I had to get my spikes on my feet and the spikes in the tripod and just spike it down. And I had to wear these goggles that were like pink and purple because it's the only ones I had, but I couldn't even open. You know, I couldn't have my eyes exposed because it was just too cold and too windy. So I can't hardly plant myself in front of the scene to photograph it, and I can't even hardly see it. and I had to do focus stacks of the bubbles in the foreground and the mountains in the background and the sky and everything. So it was this incredibly kind of complex image from a technical standpoint, but also under like the most difficult conditions imaginable. And that's one of the reasons I love landscape photography so much, is sometimes, you know, you're caught in those moments where conditions are just insane. But those are usually when the good photographs happen. There's a correlation between being uncomfortable and getting good images out of it. So like usually the crappier the weather, the more interesting your photograph. If you have like a storm coming in, you know what I mean, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or the average person, you know, will have a bluebird day hiking along. And they're like, perfect weather, and I'll be like, yeah, this sucks. Like,
Yep.
give me a lightning storm or something.
I know.
Yeah.
When I get excited when it rains or if there's lightning, and I'm like, ooh, I can go out and get some great lightning shots, you know, and everyone else is like,
Uh-huh.
oh no. So there were two kind of things that you mentioned that I want to follow up on the tracks of. One is about the question of safety and real world challenges while doing landscape photography or wildlife photography. And then you mentioned focus stacking, and let's tackle that when we talk about sort of gear and technique. But let's talk about some of the safety stuff first, because it sounds like from what you were saying with those, what was it, 50-mile-an-hour winds, and you could barely even get your spikes to stick in, like that could have been a life or death kind of situation, it sounds like. So what
Um,
are,
yeah, probably not relative. I've probably had some other experiences where I was more likely to die for sure. We were, you know, close enough to a road that like somebody would end up finding me. If I fell down and hurt my head or something like that, you know what I mean? But you're right. There are instances, like the bear thing. Or there was another time I was on the North Shore and I fell asleep on the ground, and I woke up to a bear nibbling on my face, like literally, on top of me. Yeah, like licking and nibbling my face. So I almost died there for sure. And I
how
almost
did you
got
get
bit
out of
by a
that one?
rattlesnake. I think because I was so tired. It's kind of a long story, but we got lost hiking, and we hiked through the night, and so I was up for like 48 hours because we had driven from the cities. We were just going to headlamp in a mile and missed our campsite and hiked through the night. So I was just tired, and by the time we got to our next campsite, it was like noon or something the next day, and I was just done. So I just fell on the ground and after I cleaned my hands and hung out my food and did everything I was supposed to do, I just fell asleep on the ground. And then I started having a dream about a puppy dog licking my face and jumping on me and playing. So in my dream, you know how sometimes there's some stimulus that's happening in the
Yeah.
outside world that works its way into your dream, and then you might start sleepwalking or sleep talking, and you know you're interacting with a real world thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in my dream it was a puppy, and I was very happy and I was very excited. I was playing with it, and then it started to hurt. And so in the dream, the puppy was starting to bite my face. And then once I woke up, it was, you know, a bear. And I think because I was so tired, it took my brain a few seconds to register what was happening. And so I kind of leaned forward really slowly, and it walked backwards very slowly. But I think if I was more lucid, I would have probably, you know, woken up and done one of those, and we might not be doing this interview right now.
Wow. So some of the dangers that you might encounter while doing wildlife or landscape photography would be getting your face eaten by a bear.
Yeah. I think the more
Wh-
common, that's not common for everyone, but you know, the more common things would be like exposure. Just being, sometimes I go into backcountry areas where I don't see anyone for days. You know, and sometimes I'm alone. So the risk of getting lost or twisting your ankle, breaking something, falling, and just being stuck in a place where no one's going to find you. Those are real concerns. Storms, you know, I've been through a lot of lightning storms up in the high country above tree line, and there's only so much you can do in that situation other than get into a lightning pose where, you know, you're on your tippy toes and you're kind of crouched and you have the arches of your feet connected, so that because most of the time when you get hit by lightning, you're not getting a direct strike, you're getting ground current. So if your toes are on the ground and your heels are touching like this, current will just go through one foot and to the other foot rather than up through your body and your heart to kill you. So fun tip. Yeah, if you're gonna do backpacking stuff, research the lightning posts. So yeah, weather, injury, things like that are the more common dangers than grizzly bears.
Tips that can save your life from lightning strikes only on Get the Picture podcast. So here we go. So those are some real dangers. You mentioned rattlesnakes as a possible danger.
Almost got bit
Yeah.
once, but just barely. My brother actually did get bit by a rattlesnake once and had to hike himself out and drive himself to a hospital.
Wow. So there are real safety challenges that you might encounter doing landscape or wildlife photography. I mean, then another one might be people just aren't aware of their surroundings enough, or go a little too far to try to get the shot, get the perfect angle, and fall off a cliff or fall into some water or fall through some thin ice. I imagine that those are very real dangers too.
Yeah, and I think I think more people probably fall off the Grand Canyon trying to take a selfie with their camera than the outdoorsy folks who are backpacking to the bottom and up. It's in the same way like Alex Honnold is not dying free soloing El Capitan or whatever, but a bunch of kids who are just trying to scramble up and they're drinking or whatever are probably going to die sooner. For those of us who spend a lot of time in the backcountry for long periods of time, you have this constant safety mentality, I guess, where you're doing things deliberately and thoughtfully, and so I may spend a lot of my time standing on the edge of a cliff, but I'm being very careful about it. Mom, I promise.
Yeah, so you can certainly do landscape photography without getting eaten by bears or falling off cliffs.
Totally. And I should say, like, a lot of the things I'm talking about are specific to the type of like wilderness backcountry work that I do, where I'm not really just driving from overlook to overlook in a national park, though I do that sometimes. But most of my work comes from things I do along the trail as I'm backpacking away from civilization. So some of those dangers are specific to that type of stuff too.
The bears, for example, I would guess. Yeah.
Bears, for example. Yep. Although that was next to a road, but there's one of them was next to a road. The other one was in the backcountry.
All right. So now let's get more into gear and editing. So if someone's just getting started and wants to do landscape photography, what camera and lenses would you recommend that don't break the bank, but talk about what the optimal gear is too?
Yeah. Well, I shoot on a Sony A7R4 62 megapixel full frame mirrorless camera with a trinity of Tamron lenses, believe it or not, because they're incredibly light. And these new E-mount, I'm sure they're just as sharp for Nikon or whatever, but a lot of these new Tamron lenses are just like 95% of the G Master quality at like half the cost.
Yep.
And it's another thing with the backpacking is like the lightness of the lens is one of the most important things, which if you're hauling around a G Master lens at a wedding or something, I mean, it may get a little cumbersome. But for me, walking 15 miles a day for a week, it's a whole different story. And I said, for those who don't know, the beginner folks, when I say a trinity of lenses, that's usually what we refer to as your wide, your kind of mid-range, and then your telephoto. And for the beginner kind of specking out their first camera to buy, I guess one piece of advice I would have is research for the future and don't buy your way into a kind of a closed system that you can't get out of. So you might look. I'm a Sony guy, so I'm going to recommend a Sony camera. But whatever you use, Canon has, and Nikon and Olympus, they all have wonderful offerings now, especially in the mirrorless world. It used to not be the case. Sony kind of had a couple generation head start, but I feel like we've achieved parity at this point. But you may look at like something in the A6000 series of Sony that uses that same E-mount. So that way, when you purchase lenses for that camera, when it's time to upgrade that camera body, you're not stuck with, lenses that have a mount that don't work with you have more options in the future to kind of mix and match your components and upgrade different components at a time, rather than being stuck in some sort of dead end sort of thing. Like Canon, I don't know what their smaller offerings are. Like they're kind of, I don't want to say point or click, but still interchangeable. I assume they have some offerings that accept the RF mount, that like the R6 and R8 or whatever they're up to now will accept as well. So this isn't exclusive to Sony, but that's the one piece of advice I would have is think about the future and know that very quickly you'll want to upgrade things and you'll want to get new things, and you want to find yourself a whole system that you can upgrade rather than being stuck at the end. And if you don't want to do that, honestly, cell phones take amazing pictures these days. But you can't, there's only so much you can do. You can put the phone up and you can take a picture of a scene. But if you really want to get into the creative stuff and using lenses, in specific ways to do specific things, I guess when I bring up the cell phone, because sometimes people are like, what camera can I get for $500? And it's like, a phone.
You can't even get a good phone for $500. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like the phone in the camera in your pocket, if you're not going to go, I don't want to say all out, because you can spend anywhere from $1,000 to like $50,000 on a camera. But, phones take great pictures too, to a point. And if you want to get past that point, then you're going to have to buy into some sort of system.
So you talked about the camera you use. I also use a Sony A7 III.
I think I remember that from our run-ins.
Yeah, and recording, the lens that I have in right now is one of the Trinity, Tamron Trinity lenses that I'm recording this on, 16-30, which they just released not too long ago, which is great. But yeah, so very similar setup, but you use the Sony, did you say A7R for?
A7R for, yeah.
That's what gets you the 62 megapixel. I'm curious how important that is, because you're getting a lot of detail in your shots and all through the frame. And, so I wonder, how important do you think that is to have 62 megapixels? That also allows you to really zoom in really far and then crop in if you need to for wildlife, I suppose.
Precisely, yeah. That's like, to answer your question, 95% of the time it doesn't matter. I'm not printing billboards, I'm printing smaller things where most of the time that's not going to matter. But it does allow me, like you said, to crop in quite a way. So rather than me having to carry an additional lens that covers like the 70 to 150 millimeter range, I can crop in that much and it'll still be the effective resolution of, the A7 IV or whatever. I don't know what the A7 IV is, but the A7 III is like a 26 or 28 megapixel.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, you get the idea. And then also for wildlife work as well, it gives me a little extra room to crop in and not lose too much definition or detail.
So when you're doing wildlife shots, you're not carrying like a 400, 500 millimeter lens with you. You're using just like the 70 to 180 Tamron.
No. I have a 500.
Okay.
But sometimes you want more than 500. Sometimes you want 6, 7, 1200. You can only get sometimes so close to wildlife. So it gives me a little more wiggle room in post to keep things reasonable, clarity and definition wise, and in the crop. So yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. It affords me more crop room. But then also if I do want to, print larger, I have that option too. But most of the time it's just a horrible waste of hard drive storage space.
So other than your camera and your lenses, then what other gear do you have with you when you're out doing landscape or wildlife photography?
Sure. Actually, an important thing is a good camera bag, and this would be one that I purchased a couple of years ago, but it's the Shimoda Action Explorer. So a camera bag, it works a little differently than your average backpack. It has little, access pockets on the side that I can sling the camera out of as I'm going, and then it's actually in the back that opens up. where the camera cube gets stored right here. It's usually all put together, but I was just on a flight and I can actually carry the cube itself with all the camera gear I can carry on, and then check the bag itself and kind of get away with that. But yeah, so when I'm backpacking, I have my backpack on. But if I'm doing other landscape work or wildlife or something like that, I'm carrying a backpack more like this. Specifically for photography, and then I'll have another lens that's usually bungeed to the shoulder strap there. Yeah.
And
So
does a tripod fit in there too, or does it attach on the bottom?
the tripod attaches on the side. Yeah.
On the side, okay.
Yeah. So this guy here, which is the Sirei ST124. If you're looking for a budget tripod, I mean, it depends on what you mean by budget. I think these go like $350 or something like that. But you can spend thousands of dollars on a tripod. But I've been quite happy with this one. If anyone's in the need for a budget tripod, and carbon fiber obviously is the most important thing. If you're going to be doing landscape work and you're going to be lugging tripods around, you're definitely going to want to go with something, carbon fiber, as light as humanly possible. And that would be my other, for someone who's looking for, their first camera or whatever, consider what you're using the camera for. That'll inform, obviously, the model you're going to buy for its technical abilities, but also, as far as weight. Like I know a lot of backpackers like this is smaller cameras, but still interchangeable lens.
Mm-hmm.
But not the huge honking bodies that you and I are using.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially if, like you said, you're backpacking 15 miles a day. Every ounce matters.
Every ounce matters. Yeah, I used to cut all the tags off my clothes, and like my toothbrush would be like this big, and all everything would be, my toothpaste would I'd squeeze out just enough to brush my teeth however many times. You get the idea. Weight matters.
Do you bring like a little portable chair with you or anything? I just ask because when I've been out before dawn or late at night trying to do the Milky Way and or the Aurora, and it can get really uncomfortable. You wouldn't think about it, but you're just sitting there on rocks or on sand or on, hard ground. How do you handle that?
Yeah, no chairs. If I'm in a national forest or park, yeah, well, if I'm in a park that requires a bare canister for food storage, then that makes for a nice chair. But other than that, no. Just look.
And you have a headlamp on, I imagine.
Yeah. And another advice to beginners is have a system of where everything goes so that you can get at it. Those moments in time where the light pops or the sunrise or whatever it might be, or the critter comes out or whatever, you need to know exactly where things are. So my headlamp, for example, lives in a very specific pocket right here. My backup battery and extra memory cards live in a very specific pocket right here, and etc.
So it can just be muscle memory to grab for them quick if you need them. Yeah,
precisely. Yep.
So can you talk about your editing process a little bit, and how much do you try to get the shot straight out of camera, and how much editing do you do from your raw files? We already talked about this a little bit. It sounds like you try to do more minimal editing at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be considered minimal editing, because I probably spend a lot more time on the images than I used to, and so I'm probably editing them more. But using different techniques that are maybe a little more subtle. So I use Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop like everybody else. Most everybody else. I guess Capture One is one that people use. I loved Aperture. I used Aperture forever, the Apple software that they discontinued.
Wow. Okay.
And then I was forced to go into Adobe world. I don't know. That was like a decade ago. It's been long enough. So yeah, Lightroom, Photoshop. I think it's safe to say I do 95% of my processing in Lightroom. My brain doesn't work in Photoshop. I mean, it works. Yeah. It's complicated, and so I use Photoshop when I need to do focus stacking or exposure blending or some other effects that I need to spit out, a JPEG or TIFF or whatever it might be. When I need to alter the image so fundamentally, right. those things can only really be done in Photoshop. as of right now, I don't know. It'd be nice if they added some of that functionality to Lightroom, but I suppose if you're the same company and you want people to buy both pieces of software, I'm not sure what your motivation would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and I do also, have the Topaz suite of things that I use them pretty infrequently. Like the AI sharpening or denoising and whatnot, especially now that Lightroom is adding some of that into it natively.
Hmm.
So the less I have to pop out of Lightroom, the better. But every now and then, very rarely will I use the Topaz stuff, but sometimes it works like magic, and other times it just ruins your photograph. And it's one
I
or the
haven't
other.
used that. Be
Oh, you haven't?
interesting to play
Yeah.
around with.
Yeah, I mean, if you're at a protest at night or something, and you walk away with some incredibly grainy, high noise photographs, it's worth a try. It keeps
Okay.
getting better, which I guess gets us into AI world and where AI fits in all of this and whatnot, which is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, I would love to get more into that. But first, I want to go back to you've mentioned now a couple times focus stacking. So I was going to ask if you do focus stacking because looking at your images where you have everything sharp all the way through from stuff right in front of you to the most distant mountains, I wondered if you use focus stacking sometimes to do that or just shoot with a really small aperture with a longer exposure. Also, just wondering, do you do bracketed images at all to get more dynamic range than you can get in one image? If so, yeah, can you talk about those techniques, why you use them, and maybe explain them a little bit for people who don't
Sure.
know?
So focus stacking is where you'll take a number of exposures of the same scene. So I'll put my camera on a tripod. I'll, um, you know, figure my composition out, and then you'll take a picture where you focus in the extreme foreground. You'll take a picture where you focus a little further out into the frame, another picture a little more further out, and then another picture like at the horizon. So you're creating multiple images where you're focused at different parts in depth through the scene. And the reason we do this is because your camera lens will be sharpest. It's 6.3, 7.1, 8, somewhere in that area, usually the most uniformly sharp. You'll get
Hmm.
sharp in the center at other
Hmm.
f-stops, and it'll fall away in the corners or whatever. So if you have subject matter that's extremely close to the camera and subject matter that's extremely far, you either have to crank it, to f20, f22, f18, whatever, to keep that all in focus, and then your whole image is going to soften if you're forced to use that small of an aperture. So if you take a number of exposures at different focus spots, and then you combine those together to find, Photoshop does a decent job of this automatically by looking at micro contrasts and stuff, and it'll create different layers for you but I always find I have to come back through and redo it because it just does weird stuff. But anyway, to answer the question, focus stacking is where you take multiple exposures at a smaller f-stop, like 6 or 7 or 8, and then combine them all together so that the image is tack sharp from front to back. And to answer, like, do I do it? Yes, I do. Do I always do it? No, because oftentimes I don't even have a tripod with me. So it's usually like if I can't get away with it at like let's say 11 to 13 and below, then that's a candidate for focus stacking, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. So if I can get away with it at f10 or f11, I'd much rather just process a single exposure. But focus stacking can be a hugely useful tool. Again, if you have a lot of depth in the image and a lot of stuff in the foreground that you want to keep tack sharp. But some compositions don't really warrant that. Sometimes you don't want the grass in the foreground to be super sharp. Sometimes you just want the eye to go to a certain spot on the horizon or whatever it might be. So whether or not you deploy the technique is kind of based on your vision and the technical limitations of the lens and whatever else.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
you mentioned bracketing as well. So a bracket is where you'll fire off, a shot that's like a stop down in the middle and a stop up on the meter. So you have a dimmer medium, and brighter image. And you will I do this a lot in landscape world, and most of the time people do this to kind of rein in a really bright sky. Like if I'm shooting into the sun at sunset,
Yeah.
if the camera just doesn't have the dynamic range to keep the sun from burning out and all the shadows from just being black pixels. So you'll take a darker exposure for the sky and a brighter exposure for your foreground, and then you'll kind of paint those together. And like I said, it's kind of about using technology and techniques to produce an image that looks the way the human eye and brain sees it, because your pixels don't burn out, right? You see, I mean, if you stare long enough, they might. But generally speaking, you can look at a sunset and see the shadows and see the highlights and see everything, but your camera might struggle. Although the dynamic range is just getting better and better and better and better, so I find myself doing it less and less and less. And the noise handling is getting so great that, I mean, as long as those pixels exist in the first place, if they're not like completely blacked out, I can usually massage them into existence.
Yeah.
But there are some times when you need to do it just because you're shooting a scene that's so dynamic, so bright, so dark, and one exposure will leave a lot of information out.
Right. And those are techniques that are not that difficult. If you have a modern camera, it has the ability to do those things. And as John was saying before, if you just search on YouTube, you can find videos that explain how to do these things with your camera, and just try it out if you haven't before. You can, because like you were talking about, the human eye has a certain amount of dynamic range it can take in and process, and so that you can see, whereas a camera lens can't, or a camera can't capture that much dynamic range yet, and so that's where you end up having to do multiple things.
Yeah, so I guess that speaks to how sometimes processing and spending a lot of time processing things isn't to make the image more wow necessarily, or more unrealistic. Sometimes you're spending a lot of time trying to massage the photo into realism, if that makes sense. Yeah, which
Absolutely.
is counterintuitive, I think, to a lot of people. Especially people, they'll share pictures that they took on their iPhone or whatever, and they'll be like unedited, and it's like, well, actually, your camera spits out a JPEG and it does a whole host of processing to the image. The difference is your phone is making those decisions for you, whereas professional photographers will shoot in RAW, and it's the RAWs are oftentimes just frankly unusable, and you have to make deliberate choices about how to process rather than just having a phone do it for you instantly. So there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about what processing is and whatnot, but that could be a whole separate podcast.
Indeed. So we're sneaking up close to an hour here, so I want to ask a couple more questions and then try and wrap up. But let's just talk about money on this. Like, some people get into photography and the gear is real expensive, so you start thinking, how can I make money doing this to at least pay for my gear, right? Or if not, make a career out of it. When I first started doing some cityscapes of the Twin Cities, I was like, oh man, these are great. People are going to buy these prints, and I'll be making all this money. And then I put them up on a website and nobody ordered any prints, So just curious, is it possible to make a living or make any money doing landscape and wildlife photography in this day and age? And if so, what are the ways that happens?
I know people who do. They're not me.
Okay.
So I might be the wrong person to ask, probably because I am such a bad capitalist and business person, and I have a career outside of photography that I very much love and enjoy. I work as a live sound engineer, so I mix concerts and theater for a living, and I probably have not had the same motivation that other photographers have had about monetizing their work. And in some ways, it's probably a blessing for me that I can keep these worlds separate a little bit. In other ways, not so much. I mean, I do sell prints through my website, but other than that, like I said, I'm a really bad capitalist. In 2020, I had a number of exhibitions with those portraits, and I just donated all the money. Refused to accept a dime. Every picture I've ever taken that I've liked from the North Shore along my favorite place, the Superior Hiking Trail, I donate to them free of charge. Same with Save the Boundary Waters. I did like a presentation with them and donated a bunch of images to them. I was even offered a job as a guide, a landscape photography guide with a company going to national parks, and it didn't end up working out, just as far as work-life balance and being home enough, and everything like that. But I also had thoughts about, if this becomes a job for me, guiding people to overlooks or whatnot, will that take away just the love of it, once it becomes a career? And I think a lot of people who work as professional photographers would, and rely on it as their sole income stream, would have different perspectives than me. And I understand that completely. In fact, I don't even know that I consider myself a professional photographer. And that's not to say that, my work isn't I'll leave that to others to decide whether it's in league with professional photographers. I know some professional photographers that I think I do better work than, but one person explained it to me. I went to visit a gallery and I'm like, oh, I'm just up here doing some shooting myself. They're like, are you a professional? I'm like, oh, I don't know. And they're like, do you have a job? They're like, do you have a job that's other than photography? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, then you're not a professional. I'm like, okay.
That's
But it
not
got
how I
me
would
to,
define it, but yeah.
it's not necessarily how I define it, but I thought about that. And like in live sound work, there's a lot of people who do sound for fun, for their local friend's band or whatever. I don't consider them a professional. I'm a professional live sound engineer, so because I make my money at it. So there's a mix of both. Long story short, I think in landscape photography, just judging by some of my colleagues and friends, the lion's share of their income probably comes from guiding trips, from selling tutorials. They'll make some money selling prints, but if you don't have like your own physical gallery, I think that can be challenging.
Right.
But
Or I guess you could go out.
yeah, you have to be
You,
really flexible and get money from different ways than just selling prints. It's a hustle. It's a huge hustle. And that might be one reason why I've self-sabotaged myself and haven't really tried to make it my sole income stream or whatever, is because I'm probably afraid of the hustle. It sounds like a lot of work. So yeah, I do sell prints. I refuse to do a calendar, no matter how many relatives or friends beg me to. But that's another one. People sell calendars. I know a lot of landscape photographers. And again, not to dismiss anyone or talk. These aren't criticisms. It's just for me personally. It's just more about the love of nature. But everyone's got to eat, so not a criticism of how anyone conducts their photography business. But if you're asking someone, how do I make money? I'm a bad person to ask.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So 2 more questions, and then I think we'll wrap it up. So you have gone to a lot of amazing places, national parks, things like that, but you've also done a lot of work right here in Minnesota. Like, if somebody's looking to get into landscapes or wildlife, do they need to go to a wildlife refuge in Southern Africa or the most amazing national park in the U.S., or is it possible pretty much anywhere to find some amazing landscapes, do you think?
Yeah, in fact, I spend a fair amount of time in winter photographing wildlife in the Twin Cities, of which there are plenty. Coyotes and owls, tons of owls. There's snowy owls at the airport. You may have seen a lot of people go for that. Not so much for me, because I don't like the backdrops. But yeah, you can find all sorts of fun wildlife to take pictures of. We're also blessed in the Twin Cities to have just an incredible park system and the largest wildlife refuge system in a metro area in the whole country, in the Minnesota River Valley Wildlife Refuge. If you look at the Twin Cities from a map, you'll just see all along the Minnesota River, there's just huge swaths of protected, undeveloped land. And the Louisville Swamp is probably my favorite unit of that. But then also, the Driftless area is beautiful. The North Shore is kind of my spot, and the Boundary Waters, the BWCA. That's world class, man. Especially in the fall, and I love the winter too. Though I mean, can't really backpack in the winter, but Lake Superior in the winter when you get the sea smoke and the ice and everything, I mean that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's world class. That's some of the best stuff ever. So no, you don't need to travel all around the world to take pictures. Not when you live in a place as beautiful as Minnesota. That's for sure.
Amazing. So I was just going to wrap up with where people can follow you and find your work, but you've mentioned a couple times the portraits that you did at George Floyd Square in the period right after the murder of George Floyd. I think it's worth mentioning that, if you don't mind, just taking a quick few seconds to talk about that series and if that's available anywhere for people to see online. I'm not sure if it is. And then just more
Yeah,
generally where people can find your work.
sure. So the 2020 Uprising portrait series can be found I think it's portraits of the Minneapolis-uprising.com. It's like a WordPress that I put together. So you can find it there. But basically, I mean, he was murdered less than a mile from my house where I lived in Powderhorn Park, and I just felt overwhelmed. And so often in those instances, I had done some portraiture work of activists, after Jamar Clark died and Philando Castile, and it saved the Boundary Waters. It became, after the RNC in '08, I started taking my camera to protests, and I kind of refined this style of, I don't know what you would call it, active consent, of just like, do you mind if I take your picture? I'll start a conversation with you, get to know you a little bit, have you look at the camera. So I took that into what ended up becoming like a year-long project. I as a live sound engineer, like I said, that's my work. My whole industry was gone. So I was pretty much unemployed. And so I just kind of embedded myself at George Floyd Square for about a year, and just got to know the people there. Whenever I would overhear like an interesting conversation or something, I would just look for stories. 'Cause the idea is, in my head at least, is I wanted to communicate that movements like this require the participation of all sorts of people doing all sorts of things. And it's not one thing or another. And I got really frustrated also with the coverage that I saw from local and national outlets alike. They would come to George Floyd Square, they'd sit in front of the mural, they'd say, a car burned today. And it was just always the same thing. And I think they missed, the media has a way of missing the human aspect of big stories like this, and they kind of look for the broader wide angle view, no pun intended again. So I just wanted to create, it was almost like a collaborative effort with the people that were there, almost like a yearbook of sorts, just to interview people, take their statements, why they were there, take their portrait. And it is usually, I can't take too much credit for it, because I mean, I had the equipment and maybe a general eye for composition, but it was like, where do you want your picture taken? Is there anything in the space that speaks to you? And it was usually in some situation that they were already in themselves. I would take their information, I'd send the image to them along with the write-up that I made from their interview, and I'd say, does that look good to you? You can make any changes you want. You can also remove yourself from the project at any time you want. And I still have relationships with a lot of these people today. So it was just more of a, I didn't want to be the guy just taking pictures of shit on fire. And I come from a more rural area where I know a lot of people who were not seeing the human side. They didn't know these people. And it's a lot easier to dehumanize people without looking them in the eyes and knowing their story. So every picture is just a person looking at the camera and telling you about themselves. And I thought that was an effective way to reach people who needed reaching, people who look like me, frankly, from places like where I'm from. Yeah, so that was the motivation. I wanted to do it in a very transparent, sort of collaborative way with the community, and not make people feel like I'm just another person with a camera there to extract from the space, but rather someone who's there to listen. Mostly. And I knew, again, with people who look like me, it was a time for us to listen, and that's what I wanted to do. And the way that I knew how to do that was with a camera. So
Thanks for sharing that. It's a really incredible series of photos. I encourage everyone to take a look and do, like John was saying, get to know the people who are looking at the camera. And I think thinking back, that may have been one of the influences on me to start doing more. I forget what the word that you used to describe it, where you ask somebody if you can take their picture, like in the context of a protest or something. But
Active consent. Yeah.
active consent. Yeah, I do that a lot. I've really started to lean towards that too, where I ask someone, or at least point at my camera, a picture, okay, and get. I don't do a whole interview necessarily with everyone in the midst of things, but get pictures of people looking at the camera and where you really do have to look them in the eye.
Yeah. And that's kind of how it started.
Powerful.
That's how it started in 2020 with me. I mean, in those first couple of days, things were a little hectic, and you couldn't always be like, do you mind if we talk for it? So it was often like point at the camera and say, thumbs up, yes, and then yes, and then you'd go for it. But I think I did notice like your Stranger series. Am I getting Stranger series? You did a series of like 100 strangers. 100 strangers. Yeah, I love that. I thought that was great. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Similar concept. Yeah, just not thematically all in the same place or on the same issue. Yeah. Let's just finish with where people can find your work.
Sure. You can find my landscape work at either on Instagram at wilderness_John. Somehow I lucked out with that handle. Or at johnsteitzphotography.com. And that's JOHNSTEITZ photography.com, and portraits of the Minneapolis uprising if you're interested in seeing the 2020 series.
Well, thanks again, John, for sharing everything that you shared today. I think there were some really amazing little tips and big conceptual ideas for people to chew on, and hopefully help them improve their photography. And for everyone listening, thanks for listening to all the way to the end. If you've made it this far, please like, subscribe, do all the things, leave a 5-star rating, leave a review, all the things that people ask on every podcast, so that we can keep going and more people can find the podcast. And if you can, money is always needed. There's Patreon and there's Buy Me a Coffee. So, hey, consider doing that too. And with that, we'll wrap it up. And thanks again, John, for sharing your experience and wisdom.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. And I'm sure I'll catch you in the streets before long.